Howdy, I'd like to comment on the debate surrounding the Florida African American history standards that were released the other day, because I think the debate um, is emblematic of a major problem in politics today, perhaps always, but certainly today, and that is the failure to honestly represent what the position of the other side is when one is commenting on or addressing whatever the topic happens to be. In this case, of course, it's the African American History Standards, and they were released on July the 19th. And pretty much immediately, the Florida Education Association released a statement related to those standards. And I'd like to focus on one particular topic that, from what I've seen, has been generating the most discussion about these standards. And so let me change views here. And so looking at this document, the press release from the Florida Education Association, focusing on that highlighted bullet point there. Meanwhile, these new standards require middle school students to be taught that the experience of slavery was beneficial to African Americans because it helped them acquire skills. So, according to the FEA, slavery was a benefit to African Americans. Well, this issue really took off in the context of Vice President Kamala Harris going down to Florida and delivering about a 25-minute speech. And I'd like to focus on what she says in regard to this particular statement. And now, on top of all that, everything she's been talking about, they want to replace history with lies, middle school students in Florida to be told that enslaved people benefited from slavery. Now, she makes in her statement some good observations regarding the importance of studying history, of knowing history, et cetera, but then she goes on in her comments to represent very well the very problem she claims to be identifying on the other side of the political aisle with respect to gaslighting, misrepresenting the history and the facts, et cetera, because I think that we will see that while her statement reflects what the Florida Education Association statement puts out, it doesn't reflect what the standards actually say. But this was, I don't remember, it was first brought to my attention or shortly after seeing other comments. I watched a clip of the Five on Fox, and in that discussion, Jessica Tarlov was asked about the statements of Vice President Harris, and she was asked if she thought that Vice President Harris had read the whole document or had just been fed a soundbite that she was referencing when she made her speech. And here's what Jessica Tarlov says. Starting before the highlight, I do think that she read the whole thing, and I think that it's an incredibly complex piece when you look. It's 191 passages. You have some good, and frankly, I'm just fundamentally uncomfortable with the sentence that blacks benefited at all from this. And by this, as I understand it, she's talking about slavery, which is the way the Florida Education Association and Vice President Harris portrayed the standards that were put out. So to look at this timeline, and each of these are a couple of days apart, the FEA put out their press release on the 19th, shortly after the standards were released. On the 21st, Vice President Harris went to Florida and made her presentation in which she says that Florida students, middle school students in Florida, are to be told that enslaved people benefited from slavery. And then on the 24th is when the Fox piece was presented, in which Jessica Tarlov, I believe I'm saying her name correctly, makes the comment, I'm just fundamentally uncomfortable with the sentence that blacks benefited at all from this. But if we look at what the document actually says, which none of these sources quote specifically, the document, the standard, and not familiar enough with all this to know what all the coding and everything reference, but the clarification is what actually is being debated. Instruction includes how slaves develop skills which, in some instances, could be applied for their personal benefit. So the benefit was not slavery, it was skills that some slaves may have developed that could have benefited them personally, perhaps in the context while they were enslaved, earning extra funds to secure their freedom, purchase their freedom, or when slavery was abolished, or whatever the circumstance might have been. And the actual standard that's being discussed examine the various duties and trades performed by slaves, e.g., agricultural work, painting, carpentry, tailoring, domestic service, blacksmithing, transportation. In other words, skilled work, trades that would have been useful under any circumstance when slaves learned, obviously, as slaves under force, how to do certain things. There may have been, this benchmark clarification suggests, an opportunity for the slave to use that particular skill for their benefit, the benefit of providing for their family, etc., etc. But this does not say that slavery was beneficial in any way whatsoever. In fact, if you read through the whole document and read all of the discussion, and these standards cover K through 12, so it's over the 12 years of education, the students are to learn in incremental steps about African American history in this context or in these broad contexts in certain circumstances. But if we look at what some of the authors, two of the authors of this work said, the intent of this particular benchmark clarification is to show that some slaves developed highly specialized trades from which they benefited. Any attempt to reduce slaves to just victims of oppression fails to recognize their strength, courage, and resiliency during a difficult time in American history. Florida students deserve to learn how slaves took advantage of whatever circumstances they were in to benefit themselves and the community of African descendants. We encourage everyone to view these robust standards for themselves. So, having read the highlighted excerpts here, the point is clear that the intent is not to suggest that slavery itself was beneficial to the slaves, but that in spite of the oppressive nature that many slaves labored under, the oppressive circumstances that is reflective of slavery itself, many of the slaves were able, in fact, to learn trades, skills that they were able to apply to their personal benefit in spite of the circumstances in which they found themselves. Now you see here the press release and the actual excerpt. And just to point out that again, the FEA press release, the Florida Education Association, the union that represents many of the education workers, if not most of the education workers in the public school system of Florida, claims that the new standards require middle school students to be taught that the experience of slavery was beneficial to African Americans because it helped them acquire skills. You will not find that statement or even that implication anywhere in these standards. And the statement that the FEA is misrepresenting clearly indicates that the skills that some, even under duress, may have been forced to learn, which at times turned to their own personal benefit as they overcame the circumstances in which they found themselves and were able to achieve some measure of success for themselves and for their family. So as we looked at the document and just a few of the responses to the document, in the timeline that I've laid out, as I've tried to suggest what I think is a logical understanding of the immediate response to the document by the union that is responsible for representing the document to the teachers and the parents of Florida, and then how others may have directly or indirectly picked up on the union's initial representation of the document. Rather than going to the document itself, I'd like to suggest that honesty is key. And understanding what it is we're talking about, what, from our perspective, the other side is saying, and respond to what they're saying, not what we want them to have said if we are trying to simply score points, but to actually be able to engage in honest discussions about these various issues that are before us, it seems today, constantly, until we learn to honestly understand what others are saying and to then represent honestly what others are saying. We're not going to be able to bridge the divide between the different factions in our political spectrum. Thank you all very much. Appreciate your time. Look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you very much for your time. I've got a couple other videos listed here if you'd like to take a look at those. And as I'd like to discuss issues related to politics, religion, society, and how in the world we're supposed to understand ourselves and life in the world. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Bye bye.